Right now, you probably wake up to an alarm, rush to get ready, and spend most of your day working for someone else. But for over 99% of human history, none of that existed. No jobs, no bosses, no 9 to 5, no alarm clocks screaming at you before sunrise. So here's the real question. If ancient humans didn't have jobs, what did they actually do with their entire day? The answer might completely change how you think about work, freedom, and what a normal human life is actually supposed to look like. Because here's the twist. In many ways, ancient humans may have had more free time than you do right now. No emails waiting after dinner, no meetings eating up the morning, no endless to-do list refilling itself the moment you finish one task. Just a rhythm of life shaped entirely by daylight, hunger, and rest. Most people imagine ancient humans as constantly exhausted, spending every waking hour desperately searching for food just to survive another day. But anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies found something shocking. Many ancient communities only spent around 3 to 5 hours a day on actual survival tasks: hunting, gathering, building shelter, or making tools. 3 to 5 hours. That's less than most modern workdays. The rest of their day, it was theirs. Completely theirs. This idea challenges almost everything we assume about ancient life. We picture constant struggle, constant danger, constant labor, but the reality was far more balanced than most people realize. This research came from studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, like the Hadza people of Tanzania, whose way of life closely mirrors how humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years before farming existed. Anthropologists who lived alongside these communities expected to find exhausted, overworked people. Instead, they found something closer to a relaxed daily rhythm, with plenty of time left over once essential tasks were complete. Of course, life wasn't easy in every sense. Danger from predators, disease, and unpredictable weather was real, but the sheer number of hours spent laboring each day was surprisingly often less than what a typical office worker logs today. To understand why, you have to understand how differently ancient humans thought about needs versus wants. They didn't need a bigger house than their neighbor. They didn't need the newest tool if their current one still worked. They didn't need to save money for retirement because there was no concept of retirement. Everyone contributed to the group in whatever way they could, for as long as they were able. Once enough food was gathered for the day, or enough meat was hunted to feed the group, the incentive to keep working simply disappeared. There was no boss demanding overtime, no deadline pushing them to do more than necessary. This is sometimes called the original affluent society by researchers. Not affluent because they had a lot of stuff, but affluent because they wanted very little, and what they wanted, they usually already had. Modern life constantly creates new wants. Ancient life mostly involved meeting needs and then stopping. There was also no concept of accumulating wealth for its own sake. Carrying around excess possessions was often a burden rather than a benefit, especially for groups that moved frequently to follow food sources. Owning more than you needed didn't make you more respected. If anything, generosity and sharing what you had with the group carried far more social value than hoarding resources ever could. This completely flips the modern relationship between work and reward. Today, many people work extra hours specifically to acquire more things. In ancient life, working extra hours to acquire more things you didn't need would have made very little sense and may have even been viewed strangely by the rest of the group. Once survival tasks were done, ancient humans filled their time in ways that might surprise you. A huge amount of the day was spent socializing, sitting together, talking, telling stories, laughing around a fire. Conversation wasn't a break from real work. For ancient humans, it was one of the most important activities of the day because strong social bonds directly increased survival chances for the entire group. They also spent enormous amounts of time resting. Not lazy, unproductive resting, deep, unhurried relaxation. Napping in the shade during the hottest part of the day. Lying back and simply existing without guilt, without the modern feeling that rest has to be earned. Play was another massive part of daily life, and not just for children. Adults wrestled, danced, played simple games, and engaged in physical contests, partly for fun and partly to sharpen skills they might need later. Art and creativity filled time too. Cave paintings, carved tools, beads, and decorations weren't just decoration. They were entertainment, self-expression, tradition, and connection, all rolled into one. Music likely played a huge role as well. Simple instruments made from bone or wood, rhythmic clapping, chanting, and communal singing would have filled evenings around the fire. These weren't rehearsed performances for an audience. They were shared experiences that everyone took part in, strengthening the bonds within the group. Storytelling deserves special mention here too. Long before written language, stories were how knowledge, history, warnings, and humor were passed from one generation to the next. An elder telling a dramatic tale of a dangerous hunt wasn't just entertaining the group, they were teaching survival lessons in a form everyone would remember and repeat for years to come. There was no school schedule, no homework, no structured curriculum. Children learned constantly, but not the way we think of learning today. They learned by watching, by copying, by playing games that secretly taught them real survival skills, throwing accuracy, tracking, plant identification, teamwork. A child chasing their friends across a field wasn't just having fun, they were building endurance and speed they might need one day to escape a predator or catch food for their family. This blending of play and learning meant childhood itself lasted much longer in terms of freedom, without the rigid separation of school time and free time that defines modern childhood. There was also no pressure of grades, exams, or comparison with other children's progress. A child learned at their own pace, guided by curiosity and real-world necessity rather than a fixed curriculum designed for an entire classroom. Mistakes weren't punished with red ink on a page. They were simply part of figuring things out, often corrected gently by an older sibling, a parent, or another member of the group. None of this means ancient life had zero responsibility. Work absolutely existed, but it looked completely different from a modern job. There was no single person doing the same repetitive task for 8 hours a day, every single day, for decades. Instead, tasks rotated. One day you might help build a shelter. Another day you might gather fruit. Another day you might help prepare tools or care for children in the group. This variety meant the body and mind were rarely bored in the way modern repetitive jobs often create. Different muscles, different skills, different challenges spread naturally throughout the week. There was also no separation between work and life, the way we experience today. Cooking wasn't a chore squeezed in after a long shift. It was simply part of the rhythm of the day, often done together, often social, often even enjoyable. Even the concept of a weekend or a scheduled day off didn't need to exist because work itself was never structured into rigid blocks of time in the first place. There was no clock dictating when the workday started or ended. Tasks were guided by daylight, weather, seasons, and the natural needs of the group, not by an external schedule imposed from above. This meant the pressure of running out of time that so many people feel today simply didn't exist in the same way. If a task wasn't finished today, it could often wait until tomorrow, without penalty, without a supervisor, and without guilt. So, if life had this much balance, what changed? The answer is farming. When humans transitioned from hunting and gathering to agriculture, something fundamental shifted. Farming required constant, repetitive daily labor, planting, watering, protecting crops, harvesting, storing food for entire seasons. Suddenly, there was always something that needed to be done. The relaxed rhythm of hunter-gatherer life was replaced with the demanding, unforgiving schedule of agricultural life. Ironically, many researchers now believe that overall health, leisure time, and even nutrition may have gotten worse for early farmers compared to hunter-gatherers, at least initially. More food was eventually produced, but it came at the cost of significantly more labor and often a less varied diet. This shift from hunting and gathering to farming is where many historians believe the modern concept of constant work truly began, a concept that thousands of years later evolved into the jobs, schedules, and work weeks you live with today. Farming also introduced something else that hunter-gatherer life rarely required: the need to defend stored resources. Once a community had a surplus of grain sitting in storage, it became a target. This led to the rise of ownership, boundaries, and eventually hierarchy, as some individuals took on the role of protecting or controlling these stored resources. Many historians point to this exact moment as the beginning of inequality as we understand it today, something that was far less pronounced in most hunter-gatherer societies. Here's the uncomfortable thought this raises. Humans didn't evolve to work 8, 9, or 10 hours a day, every single day, for most of our lives. For the vast majority of human history, our bodies and brains were shaped by a completely different rhythm. Short bursts of focused effort, followed by long periods of rest, connection, and play. Modern work culture in many ways runs directly against instincts that took hundreds of thousands of years to develop. The stress, the burnout, the feeling that rest has to be justified or earned. None of that reflects how humans lived for most of our existence. This doesn't mean modern jobs are bad or that farming was a mistake. Agriculture eventually allowed civilization, cities, and everything else that followed to exist. But it does mean the constant hustle so many of us feel today isn't some natural, unavoidable part of being human. It's a relatively recent invention, and understanding that might be the first step toward building a healthier relationship with rest, work, and time itself. Maybe the goal isn't to abandon modern life and return to the wild, but maybe it's worth remembering that for most of human history, rest wasn't something you had to earn, productivity wasn't the measure of your worth, and an afternoon spent doing nothing at all was simply normal. If you had to guess, how many hours a day do you think you would have worked as an ancient hunter-gatherer? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more surprising truths about how ancient humans really lived, hit subscribe, because history has a lot more to teach us about being human than most people realize.